Okay guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to mimic a drag click with a macro in GHub. Pretty simple process. But before we get into it, let's do a little bit of a background. Drag clicking is a method to rapidly click your mouse by running your finger over the top of the left mouse button, just the right way that the friction causes your finger to bounce up and down. Some people are able to use drag clicking to get their CPS or clicks per second up to 40 or 50. Now, when I went and did a few tests, my average CPS is around 8. That's using a few different mice, so I know that's a pretty good reflection on what I can achieve naturally. So it's pretty obvious that if you master the drag click and you play a game that relies heavily on a high clicks per second, you're going to have a big advantage. So what can we do with a macro to mimic this? Now, before we get into that, it's worth noting that some people might consider auto-clicking macros cheating. Some people might go as far as to say drag clicking is cheating, even though it requires a certain skill level. Others would argue that if you can do 8 clicks per second normally, then what's the problem with creating a macro that does 8 clicks per second for you? It still takes the same amount of time, just saves you from having to do the clicks. Regardless of what side of the fence you sit on, there is a lot of uses for setting up an auto-clicking macro. Whether you use it for productivity in those solo games or solo adventure games. It is worth noting that you absolutely do not want to be using an auto-clicking macro in some games. This is because a lot of modern games employ an anti-cheat software. This software picks up if you are using any kind of unnatural way to achieve a higher CPS. If you're playing something like a solo adventure or a one-player game, then I don't see any issues with using an auto-clicker macro, but I'll leave that up to you. So the question is, at what point is too high for clicks per second? When does it become achievable with a high level of skill to becoming outright cheating? Well, there's not really an answer. Game developers typically don't publish the metrics that they use to determine if someone is cheating or not. You do not want to try too high in a competitive game and get yourself banned. The process to set it up is fairly simple. So the first thing you're going to need to do is open up your GHub and select the device that you want to be assigning this macro to. I'm going to assign it to a side button on my G502. On the left hand side here, you'll want to open up your assignments and select macros. So first thing we're going to do is create a new macro. We're going to call this drag click. There's a few different ways you can make this macro, but my absolute 100% suggestion would be a repeat while holding. I find this method a lot easier because it means you can set the exact right amount of keystrokes you want, and as soon as you stop holding the button that the macro is assigned to, the macro will stop. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to record our keystrokes. So select Start Now and record keystrokes. We're just simply going to move the cursor down below and click twice. I would recommend only ever doing 1 to maybe 3 if you're doing one of these. I wouldn't do 20 different mouse clicks because that's just going to cause the macro to be excessively long, which you just don't need. We're going to stop recording. So now we've registered a mouse down, mouse up, mouse down, mouse up action. We need to remove our standard delay, which is up the top here. The GHub naturally uses a 50 millisecond delay. As you can see, my delays are a little bit all over the shop. 95 millisecond gap between when I pressed the mouse down and when I released it up, or when it registered that it was down and when it registered that it was up. So these delays determine how many clicks per second you're going to be able to achieve with this macro. I've tested every delay in milliseconds from 5 to 80 to show you what CPS you would actually achieve with this macro. So I'll leave this up for a few seconds here, but also there'll be a downloadable copy in the comments below. So once you've created the macro, just return to the configuration screen. You'll see the macro listed on the left hand side. Just drag it across to the button that you want to assign it to. I'm going to put it onto my side button here. It's really important to note here, do not assign this macro to your primary click. That will mean that you won't be able to use your primary click anymore. It's going to cause all kinds of issues. I also wouldn't recommend assigning it to the secondary click because that's going to mean that you can't right click anymore. If you have a side button, assign it to the side button. Do not assign it to left or right mouse button. The 502 has a lot of options. I could assign it to my DPI up or DPI down buttons. I could assign it to my left or right scroll. But in this case, I'm going to assign it to my back side button. Hopefully that's fully explained the process, guys. If you liked the video, please hit subscribe below to see when I put out the next ones. If you've got any questions about this video or any suggestions of some future videos, chuck them in the comments below. I read everything.